Yeah, hi there. These comments are for R. I'm just using your last initial for privacy purposes, and I am Michael, the founder, owner, and the materials writer for all of your lessons at the 7-Step System to Pass the TOEFL IBT. You're also one of my students in the English language program here at California State University, San Bernardino. Now here on the left is the actual lecture, right? So we're going to listen to how you responded to this lecture. So the question is, using examples from the lecture, explain the most important events surrounding the sinking of the Titanic. So let's listen to your response.
In the day of April 14, 1912. During that day, all passengers were enjoying the Titanic. While the day was passing, ice warnings came and were directed to the captain. That night, Frederick was at the crow's nest acting as a lookout.
Now wait a minute. Where is this information coming from? Who is saying this? Is this a reading passage? Is this a lecture? Actually, I think you said that already though. Wait a minute. I think you're okay, but you should acknowledge it several times.
In the day of April 14, 1912.
Let me go back
that day,
again.
In the day of April 14, 1912. During that day, all passengers were enjoying the Titanic. While the day was passing, ice warnings came.
Now here's the problem with the introduction. What is the purpose of what you're trying to do? You're trying to explain several events that were important in the sinking of the ship. So when you frame the introduction, you have to start off something like this. You have to say, according to the lecture, there were several important events which caused the Titanic to sink. So instead of just talking about April 14th, 1912, you have to talk about what events, in your opinion, were more important which caused the ship to sink. So I think that your introduction doesn't really identify the purpose of your speaking task. So you need a better introduction.
Came and were directed to the captain. That night, Frederick was at the crow's nest acting as a lookout. An iceberg will prove difficult to spot because of the ocean conditions. Meanwhile, ice warnings...
Now wait a minute. Now what do we know about the ocean conditions? If you look at the lecture, I think this is something you're almost there, but what you're not saying is what you have to do is you have to repeat key terms from the question. You have to say one important event which was important in the sinking of the Titanic was the fact that it was really, really cold that night and there were icebergs out in the ocean. Right? That's an important thing because if there were no icebergs, then the ship would not have hit one. But the other idea is here. It says, with the Atlantic being so calm, icebergs would prove difficult to spot. Without water breaking at the base, icebergs were virtually invisible. This is a key idea here that you didn't really mention. Now maybe you'll mention it later on as we get going, but let's see.
Came across which were ignored. Finally,
okay, so they ignored ice warnings from the California. Why was that important? Right? Because had they listened to the warnings from the ship California, had they listened to those warnings and stopped for the night, they surely would not have hit the iceberg and surely nobody would have drowned. So I like that you're mentioning that idea, but you're not connecting it to a broader context.
About 11:40, Frederick saw an iceberg. Immediately the alarm bell was sounded, but despite all efforts, the Titanic hit the iceberg.
Now why was that? Think about this. The Titanic was traveling at 22.5 knots. Right? What that means is if they see an iceberg and the ship's going really, really fast, in your opinion, does it make it easier or more difficult to avoid the iceberg if the ship's going really fast? It makes it more difficult, right? So from what you just said, you might want to say because the Titanic was traveling so quickly at 22.5 knots, it made it very difficult for the Titanic to avoid the iceberg. But the other problem you did mention is another important point. The binoculars that Frederick, Fleet, and Lee should have had in the crow's nest were misplaced at Southampton, which would make it even more difficult to see any icebergs in front of the ship. Okay, so what do we got? So I think you can't get that strong of a score here. So the first thing is your introduction. You're not very clear as to the purpose of the introduction. So if you did something like this, if you say, according to the lecture, there were several important events which happened causing the great Titanic to sink. You can say, first of all, on the night of the sinking of the ship on April 14th, 1912, it was a very cold night and there were growing ice fields surrounding the Titanic. Then you can even say another important event which caused the ship to sink was the fact, and we can go over to here, you can say was the fact that because the ocean was so calm, it would be difficult to see icebergs with no water breaking at the base. Then you want to say, in addition to that, the two workers or crew members who were in the crow's nest looking for icebergs, they had misplaced their binoculars in Southampton, which would make it even more difficult to spot icebergs. Then you say, finally, according to the lecture, because the ship was traveling at about 22.5 knots, when they finally saw the iceberg, it was too late to turn from the iceberg because of the speed of the ship, and they finally hit the ship, and then 2 hours later everybody died. You see what I'm saying? So you're missing a lot of ideas here. So what does this tell me? It tells me a couple of things. I'm not convinced entirely that you have the most important points from the lecture, or you weren't able to connect these ideas back to why the ship sank. You were able to remember some of the facts from the lecture, don't get me wrong, but you weren't able to connect these ideas to the actual questions. That really is the big issue. Okay, so now the question is, what is your actual score here? So the TOEFL will score you from 1 all the way to 4 on your speaking task. So in my opinion, and based on what you just did, I don't think you can score in the 3 range. So you're going to be below 23 points out of 30 on this particular practice test. Alright, so let's look at 2. It says, this is the important thing. I think your biggest weakness is topic development. So you have omitted key ideas. You have limited development of important information. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Your ideas are not well connected or cohesive. In fact, I will need to be familiar with the speaking task you're answering in order to understand what you're saying. I'm also going to say yes on that. So I'm going to put you right now, let me write this down before I forget. I'm going to put you at about 2.16 out of 4, or 17 points out of 30 on this practice test. Now what does that mean for our TOEFL 600 class? If you look in the syllabus, go to page 9, and you can see the numerical score you will get for each integrated speaking practice test. 2.1, this is going to put you at 75% on this speaking practice test, right? So then, what do? I'm going to give you some suggestions here. I think you should take a look at listening lesson number 1. If you go to the listening section of my course, it's a good lesson on note-taking. I think that you are a little bit weak in your listening comprehension abilities, to be honest, right? That one's important. Now the other one here is speaking lesson number 7, this one. I definitely think you need to look at that particular lesson because your ideas did not connect together very well. And speaking lesson number 7 will give you some good tips on how you can better connect your ideas. So those are, I think, at least 2 lessons that you can focus on. Now the other thing is, with your pronunciation, yeah, I think that you can actually make some improvements in that area also. I'm going to give you some lessons that I think will be beneficial for you. I'm going to go to my course right now so we can take a look at it. And thank you for completing the speaking practice test, by the way. Okay, with pronunciation, I'd like to have you take a look at two parts: intonation and thought groups and blending. So speak clearly lessons 36 through 40. I think you can work on your tone a little bit. The main thing here is you need to work on varying your intonation a little bit more than you are. And you can also do practice with thought groups and blending, which is a speak clearly lesson number 41 through 44. This can help you a little bit with your pausing. Alright, that's pretty much it. So you know many things now. You know what your score is and why. I've even given you some suggested lessons in my online TOEFL course that can help you improve some of your speaking abilities right now. And thank you for completing the speaking practice test. Now, I'd recommend, before we do the integrated writing practice test final exam, I'd recommend that you do some practice before you do the final, so it will not be a grade. So if you go to the writing part of my course, let me show you, because I don't want you to get shocked about this. So you need to get some experience. Remember that the other students have already completed one before you showed up for our program. So what you can do is go into the writing part of my course and do 1 through 10 only here. So I want you to take one of these practice tests before the final exam so you can get some feedback from my teaching assistant, and then I will grade your final exam when you submit it at the end of the quarter. So I'd recommend that you do maybe 1 or 2 of these practice tests before the final exam. Try to get you prepared for that. Alright, anyway, thank you very much.